David. Well, it's good to be back on your show again this morning. And first of all, I think it will happen. As I said on Fox TV last week, I think that it will be one of a series of meetings. I think the end game is what's important here, and it's well beyond a meeting. And so I think that's kind of where we're at. We're heading in the right direction here, but we have a long way to go before this is done.
And by the way, if we can only stick with the issues, such as we know of them at hand, not the size of an envelope or the size of a letter, which, while it became a Twitter sensation, the fact is that the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, had delivered a similar-sized letter to the South Korean president, Moon Jae-in. So let's take that and why narrative versus reality matters, because Bill, that got a lot of attention, but it's the behind-the-scenes work that has to get us there. And what does that look like?
Sure. So the behind the scenes is all focused on, at least it should be, focused on the end game of denuclearization, and specifically the removal of all weapons of mass destruction and long-range missile capabilities from North Korea and hence from the peninsula. So the first part of this is defining what denuclearization is. And that may sound like a simple thing, but the reality is how North Korea is defining it right now as you hear them talking, how the Chinese are defining it, how the Japanese are defining it, how South Korea and the United States are defining it, are not clearly the same. As a matter of fact, they're very different. So the first part is whatever you're going to say is your goal of this meeting or series of meetings, you need to make sure that you understand what that terminology means. And I think that will be a major part of this first meeting, of exactly what is our end game goal here, and what kind of schedule do we have, and what are the restrictions between now and the time that we actually get to that end game.
Well, I mean, and again, I think we've talked about before that end game may take decades to play out in so many ways, but there are other things going on the way to Singapore. And to just jump ahead for a moment, just days before the proposed meeting, June 12th, the Syrian leader, Bashar al-Assad, is set to meet with Kim Jong-un. What do you read into that?
Well, look, I think that there's a lot of chaff being pumped out there, and by chaff I mean that there's a lot of distraction that's being attempted by those outside of the United States to try to get us off of kilter. And let me give you some specifics. Three senior defense officials in North Korea were just removed from their position. The defense chief, Pak Young-sik, has been in that job for quite a while, and he was replaced by No Kwang Choi. Ri Soo, who is the chief of Korean People's Army general, has been replaced by his deputy, who was Ri Yong-gil. And then the Army general, who was just replaced, who is in charge of the political bureau, was just replaced by Kim Soo-gil. So there are three major players there, the three major players replaced. Of interest, their ages, these three people, are 68, 81, and 77. So these are pretty, I guess we could call them senior folks, and a little older than you would normally expect in some of those positions, even for North Korea. Now, on to your issue of Assad. Remember that Assad's father was very close to the first leader of North Korea. As a matter of fact, there is a park that's named after Kim Il-sung in Damascus. So that's pretty interesting. I've actually been there before. And in 2015, the Syrian government named that park for Kim Il-sung. They've been very close for a long time, the North Koreans and the Syrians. There's belief that there is missile technology that's been shared between the two, and maybe other WMD technology has been shared between them. So there is no surprise at all that Assad would somehow try to be involved in this to shake things up a little bit.
let's position, or I don't know if it's position, but let's include the Chinese in this conversation. Are we likely to see another meeting between top leadership in China and top leadership in North Korea? And are there others? Would Iran possibly step into this mix?
I think that any country that considers itself a major player is going to try to get into this game, but certainly China, that could be the big loser out of this or could be the big winner, depending on how this plays out, will continue to play a role in the discussions, and they should. I mean, they're a major border of North Korea. They've been close to North Korea and then not close to North Korea for a long time. And as we've talked about before, if there are any kind of combat operations that occur on the peninsula, it will significantly and negatively impact the Chinese economy. So they have a lot of juice in this, and don't forget the potential refugee problem, et cetera, if there are combat operations. So I think it's in everybody's interest here, both the South Koreans and the Chinese, that combat operations don't happen, but not at the expense of a continued nuclear North Korea. And I say that because, and you and I have discussed this before, David, but if North Korea remains a nuclear state and gains more capability, you end up with a South Korea that is nuclear, a Japan that is nuclear, therefore China increases its technology and nuclear capability, and then Iran sees them get away with it, and Iran becomes a nuclear state, and so does the Middle East, and that's a huge problem.
My guest, Dr. Bill Parker, COO of the East-West Institute and former chief of war plans at the Pentagon and a naval officer, naval commander. Bill, I'm curious about China in this aspect. Often it's said, and we've talked about it, China's concerns about a reunited, eventually, we don't know when it'll happen, but a reunited peninsula, Korean peninsula, and their border, and that border. But given the scenario you just laid out, isn't it almost more in China's interest to have a stable North Korea in some aspects while they may still have concerns? A stable border rather than a nuclear corridor seems more acceptable.
Sure. So this is a concern all the way back to when I was at the Pentagon and then Commodore on having multiple ships over there. We're constantly looking at this stability issue around the globe, and that doesn't change for this particular scenario. You're worried about the refugee issue. We're about the stability. And remember, when we're talking about unification, people that are talking about that, there are really three steps in unification as the last of them. The first step needs to be stability, and the first subset of stability in the region is getting rid of the nuclear weapons, the weapons of mass destruction. I'm talking about chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and high-yield explosives, and getting rid of that missile technology. Once you do that and you've shown some sort of stability, and then the rest of the world starts doing some trade, we start taking some of the sanctions off, their economy maybe builds a little bit, you normalize some of those relations, then you can start looking at possibly a democracy of some sort. That will take at least one generation. And then at some point you may look at unification. But I would be very surprised if unification happens quicker than that. Remember again that the ratio of economies between the East and West Germany was 7-1. The relationship or ratio between North Korea and South Korea is 40-1, meaning that South Korea has an economy that is 40 times stronger than that of North Korea. So you have a significant ways to go before you're talking about a serious democracy or unification within the peninsula.
Right, which is the question, I guess, that will only play out and cannot be answered. What does stability look like when it comes to the people? And, you just talked about the ages of the military officials, I believe 68, 81, 77, the senior age people. However, what about the population that is in North Korea? How much do we know about them? What about the aging or the younger of that population?
Well, they certainly do not live as long on average as you see in South Korea, the United States, and around the rest of the globe. Part of that is because of the absolutely abysmal living conditions they're in right now in general. Of course, the elites are living very well, the rest are not, and so there's major medical issues, major health issues, multiple feet tapeworms that are removed from people when they defect and come to South Korea and other places. So there are major health problems there. So that's part of it. The other part of it, obviously, is the economy itself. They're struggling. And then lastly, this is in general, a poorly educated country. So you have a long way to go for them to catch up to their South Korean counterparts. It'll take decades.
Yeah, this isn't just about war either, this discussion. And you and I have covered a number of aspects of this, the culture and the society. Now, the natural resource issue. Most countries, any nation, Bill, that wants to be successful in some way, maximizes its resources. You know, we say the economy is the foundation, as it is on the opposite side of that, the biggest threat when we have a bad economy, biggest threat to our national security. Is there a natural resource that can be ramped up faster, or a number of resources that can be ramped up in a scenario that would benefit the North Korean people, and actually in that case maybe the regime, and if Kim Jong-un really wants to just stay in power, something that would give him his power while at the same time giving him internal stability?
Yeah, so his natural resources in this particular case, and there are some mineral deposits in that are in North Korea, but his real natural resource is the 25 million people that he has in that country that could easily grow to double or triple that if he had the right support structure in place and his people were being fed and the health care was correct. If you take that population plus the real estate that they have in North Korea, and you combine that with the technology and the banking know-how of South Korea, many believe that they could be, in the next generation, the seventh largest economy in the world if you combine the two together. So that's a very interesting possibility and not out of the realm of possibility.
Is there a way that outside investment, and I know I'm projecting a bit far ahead, but I want to open people's minds further than just what we see in the news with potential for conflict, but should we get, past that point, something that you do at East West, looking for prevention of conflicts or conflict resolution where it happens. Let's say we get past the point. Can there be outside investment? And in any way, does Russia, by the way, play a role in this?
Sure. Russia, China, South Korea, they can all play a role, and they can all be winners in this. The economy can grow across the board in that particular part of the world. Quite frankly, the United States could be a winner of this too. And so if you invest properly. Also remember that they have a decent-sized coast, so that helps. They are a maritime country. They're actually pretty good mariners, so they have that possibility. You could have shipping that's going through North Korea. Imagine this. Imagine how a very large percentage of semiconductors around the globe come out of South Korea. Now those semiconductors and other items could be coming from South Korea through North Korea and into China to that huge market. So now North Korea could be one of the large conduits, transportation hubs, if you will. And if you get those transportation hubs going, what follows are the hotels, the infrastructure, the tunnels, the bridges, which means construction follows. So there's a lot that could happen very quickly if you open this up properly.
We're going back now. We've gamed out a number of scenarios, but going back, Bill, to where we are now, is any of this maybe the appropriate time for the conversation with, whether with Kim Jong-un or with his high-level officials? Is there time to say, look, these are the possible ways forward? This is how we help you. And is there any indication that he would even be interested in any of this versus what is often perceived, and maybe rightfully so from the outside, as the God-King complex?
I think there is a possibility, and I think that, again, if you look at this administration's willingness to leave all of the instruments of national power on the table, I think that's very helpful. You've gone from the diplomatic to the information to the military, economic, the financial, the intelligence, and law enforcement. All of those instruments of national power are being used. It has been very clear, and the president and others have been tweeting about this, have been talking about this publicly and privately, that their economy could get better quickly. I think that's very important. And I think that there has been no discussion on purpose of regime change. You've not heard anybody talking about Kim Jong-un needing to go away. So when he was doing saber rattling, I'm talking about Kim Jong-un was doing saber rattling, then chests were puffed out and people said, you want to play that game, we'll put 3 carrier strike groups and a bunch of very large and capable weapons off of your coast, and we're able to and we will use them if necessary. On the flip side, they're also willing to talk and sit down at the table and talk about how to improve their economy. And I think that combination is very valuable.
Dr. Bill Parker, COO of the East-West Institute, their website, eastwest.ngo. Bill, always a fascinating discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.